Thank you, Porcfest. Yeah. Thank you, Free State of New Hampshire. Thank you, our beloved Constitution, which allows us to be here and exchange these dangerous, dissident ideas in ways that are being targeted around the world in formerly free nations, even as we speak. I'm so happy to be with all of you. I did something unusual, which is I made notes for this talk on my phone, and usually I hate that, right? I just like paper and pen, but I realized I'd rather see your faces. My talk is about the power of what happens when people see one another face to face. So I'm going to leave my notes there and speak to you from the heart. All right. So this is not my first time at Porcfest. I actually came to Porcfest in 2021, I believe, and it was the depth of lockdown. And a few people saved my life intellectually or emotionally during lockdown and showed me that it was nonsense. One of those people was actually Jeffrey Tucker, who kept the American AIER Institute going during lockdown. And I remember going into a dining room when he made me a fellow there, and everyone was sitting side by side peacefully eating lunch. And this scene had been represented to me as, you know, the most catastrophic thing you could possibly do at that time, right? It was gonna kill everybody. And day after day after day, these people peacefully sat down together and ate lunch, and no one got sick. And I realized that that was what we were being told was probably nonsense. The other group of people who saved my sanity, I was kicked out of my synagogue at the depth of the lockdown. They wouldn't let me pray in person. And they were like, you know, we have someone from the health department who says we can't convene. And I'm like, and this was like January of 2021. And I said, when do you expect to get together again? And they said, maybe Hanukkah, which is like 11 months away. And I thought, well, this is lunacy. And then I said to my rabbi, well, you know, can't we invite people who want to come pray together to maybe sit outside in a parking lot, at the temple, outside the temple, on folded chairs, you know, 6 feet away from each other, but at least we can all be praying together. And the rabbi said no. And then I thought, well, this is madness, and I was near tears because it was a major pandemic, and what are you supposed to do if you're a religious leader? Lead your flock through a catastrophe, right? Provide succor, provide shelter, provide a connection to God and one another. And by the way, I don't want to single out my synagogue. Every single religion throughout the Hudson Valley where I live was doing the same thing, right? I'll get to that. But I literally said to my rabbi, you know, if I were a rabbi and someone said to me, I really need to meet with you face to face to pray, I would meet them in a bus stop. So they kicked me out and returned my membership fee. And that was extremely painful. So I went on social media and basically said, I don't care where I go, any house of worship, I'll go to your church, I'll go to your mosque, will someone take me in, please? And I called to the Catholic Church up the road, and they're like, if you're not vaccinated, you don't get to give the kiss of peace or receive the kiss of peace. Yes, Catholic Church. And they were seating vaccinated people separately from unvaccinated people in the church, right? And, you know, I called to the synagogue across the Hudson River. Maybe it's better in the Catskills. And they said I couldn't go into the building if I wasn't vaccinated. To this day, I can't say yahrzeit in my mom's synagogue in Oregon because in the temple, as far as I know, because I'm not vaccinated. So, right, thank you. Thank you. It's sad though, right? It's sad. It's not the way it's supposed to be. So at that point, I literally thought, this is beyond lunacy. And I put a call out on Twitter basically saying, and at that point, the Governor Cuomo, had said, no one can gather with more than 6 people at once in their homes. And I know my Constitution, and I know my First Amendment, and I know that I have freedom of assembly. And I know that no health emergency, no pandemic, quote unquote, mandates, which, by the way, have no force of law, as we're discovering with these successful lawsuits, nothing that gave the president or the governor, quote unquote, emergency powers suspends the Constitution. Nothing. And so I knew that the governor had no right to tell me whom I could have in my home or where I could go. Freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. So I went on Twitter and invited everyone to a potluck at my house. And there an old acquaintance from college connected with me, and she was connected to a health freedom community in the Hudson Valley. And so on one evening in the middle of lockdown, when everyone I knew, because remember, if you don't know me, I'll tell you, I come from the left. That's my background, right? Lifelong Democrat. I was an advisor to a presidential campaign, Clinton's re-election campaign. I was an advisor to Vice President Al Gore's campaign for president. You know, my then husband was a White House speechwriter. You know, I was deep in the belly of the beast for my whole life, right? And so all of this was new to me, but I understood that I was witnessing the destruction of logic within my own kind of legacy elite world and beyond, right? Because a lot of people were going along with this nonsense. But my old friend from college responded and showed up at our little house in the woods in upstate New York with about 50 health freedom activists. And they piled into this 1,200 square foot house, into the living room. We were literally jammed like sardines. And they brought delicious, like, crunchy food, you know, the way they do, with lots of bean sprouts and soy and, you know, like polenta things. It was delicious. But what was really striking, no one got sick, yet again. And I was a little nervous, honestly. I was like, oh, I'm going to open the window. But no one got sick. They stayed for hours. They had a wonderful time. We all had a wonderful time. But also, B, they were the healthiest looking group of people I had seen in the whole, for years, you know, since the pandemic began. And they were completely ignoring the lockdowns, the nonsensical propaganda, the COVID propaganda, ignoring it. And then I came to Porcfest, and I saw people sitting right here as you are sitting in the middle of the pandemic, and they, you know, children were playing, and dogs were catching frisbees, and people were getting high and carrying AR-15s, and, you know, it looked like America. And again, there wasn't a catastrophe, right? So I'm a reporter. We're supposed to draw our conclusions based on facts, and eyewitness accounts are used to be considered by real reporters the most important sourcing, right? What do you see for yourself? Are you in the war zone? What did you witness? Well, what I witnessed now multiple times by the time I was at Porcfest in 2021 was that people could go about their lives and nothing catastrophic happened. So I understood that it was a pack of lies. And my first book, which Jeffrey so kindly shared with you, and I do hope that you will come at 3:30 and have me sign a personal inscription to you, and I hope you buy multiples, because that book needs to be given to loved ones and doctors and university presidents and all the people around you who told you that you are crazy, right? That book traces exactly who the evildoers were who did this catastrophic thing to us and who are still trying to do it. So what I'm going to do in this talk now is walk you through what I found in that book and bring you up to the present, because I am sure, I was going to say I do feel, but I'm actually going to say I'm quite sure that we're in a time unprecedented in history, and that we really need to understand the time that we're in order literally to survive it. Would someone kindly open this for me? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am not a feminist who says men are not useful. Thank you very much. I'm the other kind of feminist, right? I'm the kind of feminist who says men are very useful. Thank you very much. So we have to understand the kind of time we're in because we've never seen anything like this in history. So I'm going to walk you through my evidence that we're in an unprecedented, actually I think kind of metaphysical time in which we're privileged and also cursed, or cursed and privileged, to be witnessing all the veils falling away. You know, we're witnessing institutions kind of that we've trusted, or I'll speak for myself, that I trusted and believed in my whole life, witnessing them almost with X-ray vision or metaphysical discernment, or maybe they're really changing, right? And they're unable to conceal their corruption. But we're seeing medical systems that we thought were organized around the healing of ill people, around the preservation of the life of the elderly, around the protection of pregnant women and babies in utero and little children. We're seeing them during 2020 to the present, they turned into euthanasia factories. You know, with $40,000 bonuses to put people on ventilators or give them remdesivir and chalk up a COVID death, right? We've seen journalism, which, again, I devoted my whole career to. I believed that most news outlets, obviously there were problems, bias, you know, advertising pressure, but I believed that most news outlets intended to give people the facts, and that most reporters were in the business that they were because they wanted to uncover the truth, present the truth, and get public interest material to the public. And I found out that, and this is in the Bodies of Others, the money trail, I found out that millions and millions of dollars had been directed first by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Millions. And second, later by the CARES Act, where this was kind of folded right in. Go ahead and boo, let it loose. Devoted to the corruption of journalism. And that meant $55 million to the BBC, for instance, to, quote, overcome vaccine hesitancy. Millions to The Guardian, where I used to be a columnist. Millions to NPR, which my poor mother believed was based on fact. Millions to the New York Times. Millions to the Washington Post. This money flow just kept going. And then with the CARES Act, which was passed by 2021, this was millions and millions and millions and millions and millions, not just to legacy media, CNN, so on, but also to every little community group, every influencer, every trusted voice, all the way down, and I've seen these grant listings, all the way down to tiny Korean dance troupes in the South Bronx, right? But why were my rabbis so weird? Why was the Catholic Church so weird? Why was your church, or maybe your mosque, your synagogue so weird? They took the money. They took the money, and the money had strings attached. And all the way down to private schools, all the way down to flowing through, you know, not through Congress, which is the way our system is supposed to work, but through HHS. And then HHS would influence all the way down to municipal councils, school boards, local administration, all the way down to tiny, tiny towns like Kopek, where I live. So this is why we were seeing the bizarre totalitarian anomalies that we were seeing in 2021, 2022, and really all the way up to the present, except that the money, thank God, is running out. This is why, and I tell these stories in the bodies of others, in 2021 into 2022, desperate parents would bring me to their kids' public high schools and show me that their teenagers were not being allowed to compete on the basketball teams unless they took an experimental injection for which the trials would not end. The trials would not end till 2023. They were trafficking the kids. They wouldn't let them play on the teams. There's no law that compelled that. That was this one school was getting $1 million for COVID adherence, right? One school in a tiny town in upstate New York. And this was so surreal, I was at the school board meeting where the parents were asking about this money, and you saw these like CCP style, like literally Stalinist style tactics being taught to American officials, American community leaders, and you saw complete inversion of our public culture. So the parents were told they had 3 minutes to speak, which is not in any law or ruling. And then the parents would say, what about this $1 million? And then I watched the whole school board get up en masse, as they had been trained to do by outside forces, and walk out of the room. Walk out of the room. And this happened over and over and over across America. This messaging of a lack of transparency, a lack of accountability. You don't count anymore. You don't get to ask the questions anymore. It doesn't matter what the First Amendment says, because we have other plans and we're answering to other forces. So in this book, I identify who the bad guys are, and I'm proud to say that this is one of the earliest books to have done so. It's now received wisdom. But in addition to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Bill Gates generally, right? Like, incarnation of like Moloch. I mean, I don't know who this guy is, but he just wants to destroy the human race, it seems, and the planet. But also, of course, the World Health Organization, about which you'll hear more at 2 o'clock if you go to Brownstone. Also the World Economic Forum, right, which boasted, Klaus Schwab boasted that he had populated governments around the world with his graduates through his network that answered to him. And so that's why you saw 2020 into 2021, this bizarre reality which we had never seen before in history, of the same policies rolled out by different heads of state around the world at the same times in different languages, right? And the same messaging. Don't go to Ramadan because you'll kill grandma. Don't go to Hanukkah because you'll kill grandma. Don't go to Thanksgiving because you'll kill grandma. Don't go to Christmas because you'll kill grandma. Around the world in 192 different languages. Have you ever seen anything like this in your lifetimes? No, indeed. And those of you who study history, and I'm at Porcfest, so I assume everyone here is an active student of history, you know that history doesn't work like this, right? Like even the worst tyrants, Stalin, right, had break-off groups, had people who were not on board with it, people who wanted to subvert what he was doing, had resistance. Even Hitler, and I don't use this example lightly, as I always say, I'm the granddaughter of a woman who lost 9 siblings in the Holocaust, right? 9 great aunts and uncles I never knew because of the Holocaust. Hitler tried to create history like that, and he didn't figure out what his army would need in facing the Russian winter, right? And he had people who tried to kill him. He had, supply chain issues. The point is, no matter how much you want to rule the world and subvert it and suppress freedom, in history up until now, there have always been rich people who can't be bribed, or religious people who kind of don't care if you martyr them because they believe they'll wake up in the arms of God, or people who just don't go along with it for whatever reason. And in this case, you virtually didn't see that. Like literally in this barn, we're seeing like 20% of the people who didn't go along with it, right? I'm not kidding. I mean, maybe 10%, but like vanishingly few. And think about 2020 to 2021. How many people did you know in your circles who were not just thinking this is crazy, but standing up and saying this is crazy? 1, 2, like single digits, right? If you were lucky, right? Thank God for a community like this. Point is, this kind of uniformity had never been accomplished before, and now we saw it. And some of that can be explained by the powerful meta-national institutions that I've described to you that had really created very effectively while we were napping, right? During those awesome 60 years following World War II, they were great for North America and Western Europe. We thought we had freedom. We thought we had human rights. We thought we had free speech. We thought no one was going to try to murder us, by government. This was the West, right? Those were the nightmares of the mid-20th century. But no, while we were napping, while it was so good, the World Health Organization, the UN, the World Economic Forum, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with the assistance of China, that has a special role, were creating these systems that at a moment's notice could be rolled out as they were in 2020 to restrict all of our rights and violently punish us, much worse in some countries than others, when people tried to say, wait a minute, we're Australia, we're a free country, here's some rubber bullets for you in Canberra, right? Or all across Western Europe, where people couldn't get on trains without vaccine passports, right? Or in Canada, where you couldn't cross the border to visit your elderly parents if you were in America and they were in Toronto without an injection of this murderous material. So I concluded, and this is my kind of headline for the talk, that there was no way to explain this. I mean, AI, we didn't know about it at that time, right? AI can do this. AI can replicate the same message in 192 different languages. But even AI couldn't explain the uniformity of evil that I was seeing, in which all these institutions' functions were reversed, like mirror images. Oh, hospitals used to sustain life at all costs. Now they were happy to euthanize the elderly. And there are hearings right now in Scotland where they're coming forward and saying, they told us when we went, the emergency respondents going out to people who'd had heart attacks or strokes in their homes, they told us to stop trying to save people over 70. Then they said you can stop trying to save people over 50. And we were very distraught and upset, but we didn't know what to do. Okay? So all these institutions reversing function, as I mentioned, massive propaganda coming from legacy news outlets and massive propaganda coming from our leaders. Well, we're more used to that. Our religious leaders completely AWOL. People who dared to hold religious services being arrested in California, in Canada, you remember that? So I had to conclude that some dark force existed that was metaphysical, because I couldn't explain what I was seeing otherwise. And as a result of concluding that there was some dark metaphysical force with the power and the will to do all of this, I also had to conclude that God must exist, because and I want to stress, I'm not proselytizing, right? I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just very humbly saying, as an intellectual, using my best logic, I couldn't understand this without there being a force of darkness that was aimed at a force of light, right? Only if with that component did this all make sense. And so what I recognized we were seeing was a spiritual battle that was manifesting with all of these restrictions and all of these dangerous, deadly injections and this war. And then what's the subtext of the book? The bodies of others, the subtext is the war against the human. Think back to 2020, 2021, what was being targeted, right? What was being targeted. And we know now, and Jeffrey has pointed this out, and many people are revealing it, and thank you to Brownstone for leading the way, and to my own site, Daily Clout, which tries to cover these issues as well. Many other news sites are revealing that these measures didn't make any sense epidemiologically, right? But how do they make sense? How do they make sense? They make sense as a spiritual war against the human race, right? Think about it. Think about it. Children, the most pure beings, right? The closest to divine origins, they were targeted. Their little faces were masked. Their speech was impaired. This morning at my hotel, I noticed 3 different 5-year-olds from 3 different families had trouble saying L's and R's. Why? Because they were 2 years old which is when you form a language, and L and R, you have to see people's mouth in order to understand how to do that yourself if you're a tiny human being, right? So their children were targeted. Their speech was targeted. Their faces were targeted. Their learning spaces were made unsafe and abusive and bullying and punitive. My stepson, who was like 10 at the time, he's given me permission to tell this story. The teachers threatened them with doubling their face masks if they didn't wear their masks correctly. Okay, this was a good public school in a nice neighborhood in the United States of America. All right? What else got targeted? Religion, places of worship, places where people could get together and get some strength from one another and from sacred texts. What else was targeted? Touch, hugging, comforting. They told us to let our elders die alone, right? Who would think that up but Satan or Moloch or Asherah or whatever you want to call these dark metaphysical forces? And I'm speaking metaphorically, but also I'm not, right? No, seriously. What else was targeted? Culture, right? Why is culture so important? We knew, Brian and I, my husband and I knew we had to leave New York City, where we were living at that time, on March 8th, 2020, when we were told that all of Broadway was being closed on one night. All of Broadway. Not this theater owner or that theater owner, but all of Broadway through a fiat by Governor Cuomo. Well, who works like that? Brian's, a veteran. He spent his life in various combat areas. As a journalist, I've been in many combat areas. You recognize that that's what people do in wars, right? That's what people do in tyrannies. They close whole sectors and don't give people a choice. And as I think Heine said, where they burn books, soon they will burn people. And we recognized what an act of violence that was to close Broadway in one night. And we went out of the city and didn't come back. Yes. Thank you. But let me go on. They targeted dance. They targeted singing. Remember all those insane New York Times articles? God forbid you should be in a choir or be near a choir. That is the most dangerous thing you can possibly do. They targeted all the things we do as human beings that distinguish us from animals. That's what they targeted. So what do we conclude by this, right? We have to conclude that that's powerful, that culture is powerful, that human touch is powerful, that prayer is powerful, that human community is powerful, that the family and caring for and protecting children is a powerful act. Why do we have to conclude that? Because I will tell you, as someone who has spent my whole life until I got kicked out in 2021 in the world of the elite, they don't waste time or money. If it wasn't powerful, they wouldn't bother trying to suppress it, destroy it, and stamp it out. All right. So, in early 2022, Aaron Siri, an American lawyer, brought a lawsuit brought a successful lawsuit against the Food and Drug Administration. And through his lawsuit, he compelled the FDA to release 450,000 documents in their custody that were internal Pfizer documents, right? And at this time, I had been deplatformed on one day in June of 2021 for an accurate tweet I posted on Twitter pointing out, again, eyewitness accounts are supposed to be so important in journalism, pointing out that women were reporting eyewitness accounts of their own bodies, right? Which feminists are supposed to believe that's really a good, important source of information. You should have the right to say what you are observing about your body. But women were reporting menstrual problems upon receiving the mRNA injection. And I literally just posted that observation, and I said something like, needs more investigation. Overnight, I was deplatformed. I woke up with news stories around the world calling me a crazy conspiracy theorist and telling everyone, including my investors, people who might hire me as a writer, my publishers, that I had been deplatformed for misinformation. And it wasn't in quotation marks, it was straight up misinformation. Overnight, my Wikipedia bio changed, hasn't changed back. All of my awards and honors, it was no longer a Rhodes Scholar, advisor to the president and vice president, 8 bestsellers, leading, etc. Now it was literally conspiracy theorist, considered crazy since 2015, right? The little backdating. Thank you, thank you. Turns out to be a very good place to be. But it was quite shocking. I didn't understand what was happening or why. But basically, overnight, my whole previous world of being I was a famous legacy media darling for 4 decades. Overnight, I was kicked out of that, and I was unpersoned, taken off all the gala lists, kicked out of all the lovely living rooms on the Upper East Side. No one would publish me, no one would answer my calls. Very scary. Not the worst thing that can happen, though, again. The only people who still wanted to talk to me were conservatives and libertarians and people of faith, which was so interesting because they wanted to know if women and babies were in danger. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist. I'm an English major. I'm not a medical doctor or scientist. All of us who took 8th grade biology know that if women are reporting menstrual problems in 2021, there will be fertility problems by 2024. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So to my amazement, I was sought out and spoke for the next 2.5 years to millions of conservatives and libertarians and people of faith. And there I had another very weird experience of seeing something I couldn't explain or understand, where the half of America that didn't care about God or women and babies didn't hear, literally could not hear what I was increasingly able to bring evidence about to warn them. And the half of America that does care about those things was able to get the warnings and the evidence that I increasingly was able to bring them. I cannot explain that. It's one of the many things I can't explain. But I'm kind of awestruck. I'm not happy about it. I love a lot of the people in the half that couldn't listen. But you've had this experience. You go to people in that world and you're like, here's all this primary source evidence. Here's peer-reviewed material. These are internal documents. And they're like, you're not an expert, you know, but NPR says otherwise. And it's like this zombie-like. And it really made me think about Exodus, I think 10? I don't remember the exact chapter, but over and over again, Moses, I'm not saying I'm Moses, but like, it was a very interesting kind of, the angel of death passed over, sparing some of the houses and not sparing the other houses. And over, Pharaoh is described as God hardened his heart. And I feel like we've been through, or we're still in that time where, you know, no matter what, hardness of heart that keeps, and then Pharaoh was not able to hear information that could have saved his own people, right? That's what the last few years have felt like. So I was, believe it or not, invited by Steve Bannon, whom I had been trained to believe was evil incarnate, right? To go on his very big podcast. And this was when these 450,000 documents had been released. And both of us were concerned that these documents would be lost to the memory hole because A, they're incredibly technical, hard to understand, and B, no journalist has the time to read through or let alone understand these 450,000 documents. So Bannon said on the air to me something like, well, of course, you'll create a project to crowdsource a group of experts to read through these and you'll issue reports. And I was like, okay. So I did that, and it really changed history. Again, I can't take any credit for this. A woman named Amy Kelly reached out to us. I don't understand how she has the skills that she has. She became a project director. She's a Six Sigma project manager. But basically, she has like metaphysical skills to organize what are now 3,250 doctors and scientists and they have read through the Pfizer documents, issued 104 reports linked to the primary documents, and they have found, I'm sorry to tell you, the greatest crime against humanity in recorded history. So for a few minutes, I have to tell you what's in the Pfizer documents, and then I'll tell you, as I end, what we can do to save ourselves. In the Pfizer documents, just some of the headlines. By November of 2020, a month after the rollout of this injection, Pfizer concluded that the vaccine didn't work. The phrase they used is failure of efficacy and vaccine failure. In other words, it didn't work to stop COVID. The third most common side effect in the Pfizer documents is COVID. But think about what this means for a minute. Everything that followed when the vaccine was rolled out, all of the drum beating that you have to take it, not just to protect yourself, but your loved ones, that was all a lie, and they knew that it was a lie. Well, you remember when they scaled back, okay, you'll never get COVID, because vaccinated people were getting COVID, they scaled back to, it'll keep you out of the hospital, it'll keep you from dying, right? Well, the only way Pfizer could get that math was that they hid the bodies of 8 infected, vaccinated people who died with COVID. If they hadn't hid those bodies illegally and failed to report the deaths illegally, they would have had to admit that more vaccinated people died with COVID than unvaccinated, which is what all the data are showing is now the case. So the only way they got the EUA was by hiding 8 dead bodies, essentially. You were told, and your loved ones were told, that the vaccine materials stay in the injection site, right, in the deltoid. But in the Pfizer documents, it shows that the vaccine materials, which are lipid nanoparticles, a fatty, industrial fat, essentially, that ordered from China, of course, that encases the mRNA, and it's covered in polyethylene glycol, which is a petroleum product. All of these materials don't stay in the deltoid. They biodistribute within 48 hours throughout the human body, and they accumulate in certain organs. The spleen, the adrenals, the lymph nodes, the brain, which explains a lot of the personality changes many people have noticed with their vaccinated loved ones. And for women, they accumulate in the ovaries. And these charts that Dr. Robert Chandler, our expert, found are very sobering because it goes down like this, leaving the deltoid, and up like that, accumulating in these other organs over time. And our experts found no mechanism by which these materials leave the body, which means that with the first injection, if you're a woman, you get some of this material accumulating in your ovaries. Second injection, more. Third injection, if you take a booster, more. And so on, right? Someone I met at my 40th reunion at Yale said he had taken 8 injections. Point is, I'll get to the menstrual dysregulation in a minute, but nurses are now reporting that when childbearing age women come in for abdominal surgery, even if it's not related to their ovaries, they're seeing blocked ovaries and fallopian tubes. Pfizer knew that, so the Pfizer documents cover 3 months, from December 2020 to February of 2021. In that time, there were 43,000 plus adverse events, and 1,220 people died. In the liver report and the stroke report that our volunteers did, more than half of the adverse events took place within 48 hours of receiving the injection, including deaths. So Pfizer knew that they were killing people. You were told to get the injection, that the side effects might be chills or fever or a little pain at the injection site. Well, Pfizer knew, and the FDA knew, meaning the White House knew, that the side effects in the Pfizer documents are catastrophic levels of neurological damage, dementias, epilepsies, tremors. How many people do you know now who have tremors, right? Strokes, industrial scale blood damage, platelet damage, thrombotic thrombocytopenia, a damage to blood which we reported in 2022. AstraZeneca was just taken off the market in Britain because of 2 cases of thrombotic thrombocytopenia. So much heart damage, myocarditis, pericarditis, inflammation of the heart. And we know that China did experiments showing that by the second injection, the mice's hearts were enlarged and had visible white patches on them. So much Guillain-Barré, so much Bell's palsy, so many skin problems, respiratory problems, severe respiratory problems. Really interesting, number 1 side effect is joint pain. How many people now walk with a limp, young adults who have knee replacements, hip replacements, shoulder replacements? How many people do you know who have joint problems, arthritis, right? Their doctors are not telling them that's the number 1 side effect in the Pfizer documents. Of course, because these materials are inflammatory. They cause inflammation, which is what joint pain is, all right? Also, respiratory issues are inflammation. Asthma is inflammation. Skin problems are inflammation. This material is inflammatory. But the second most common side effect is myalgia, which is a muscle pain. Again, how many people do you know who just don't feel good, right, after the injection? They don't feel themselves. Well, Pfizer knew, right? But I could go on and on about that, but to me that's not the most important part of what's in the Pfizer documents, because that just affects this generation of humans who are alive right now. However, what's the center of the Pfizer documents is a war on human reproduction. And it's so interesting, COVID is supposed to be a respiratory disease, right? There's virtually nothing about, mucous membranes, nasal passages, lungs, nothing. It's all creepy, creepy, creepy about sex, right? It's about mammalian sex and sexual reproduction. I mean, not all, but the center of it. So Pfizer, for instance, warned, and this is a very upsetting thing for me to share with audiences, but you've got to know, Pfizer warned men who were vaccinated not to have intercourse with women of childbearing age without using 2 reliable forms of contraception. So they knew that there was something in the semen of vaccinated men that is not good either for women or for the zygote, but it's not clear what. But Pfizer defines exposure to the vaccine as including skin contact, inhalation, and sexual intercourse. All right? Pfizer mated vaccinated with unvaccinated mice and then sacrificed them and studied the cells of their sex organs. That's how weird and creepy these people are. Pfizer knew that they were causing massive damage to women's menstrual cycles because they had a chart with thousands of women in each cell showing horrific damage to women's menstrual cycles, ranging from bleeding every day of their lives to no periods at all, meaning no babies, right, to hemorrhaging, passing tissue, agonizing bleeding, right, ruining their lives. 10-year-old girls menstruating upon being injected, 80-year-old women menstruating upon being injected, horrific damage. And one chart had tens of thousands of women in each cell. This is Mengele level science, right? They didn't tell you this. No, they deplatformed the woman who tried to tell you that this might be happening. So Pfizer knew that they were murdering babies. There's a section in the Pfizer documents where women were told not to get pregnant by Pfizer, but 270 of them did anyway. Pfizer lost the records of 234 of them, which is illegal. Of the records that survive, 80% of those women lost their babies. 80%. There's another section of the Pfizer documents called the Pregnancy and Lactation Report. It's 8 pages long, and it summarizes what they know. And they describe 2 babies in utero who died, and Pfizer attributed the deaths to, quote, maternal exposure to vaccine. Pfizer's words, that's what killed the babies. Pfizer knew that they were poisoning babies through their mom's breast milk because the lipid nanoparticles and the spike protein go into the lymph, which is building block of breast milk. Remember that the FDA shut down a baby formula factory in the middle of this, forcing the babies to nurse. They knew the babies would get sick. And in fact, nursing babies have gone from 34% of babies to 14% of babies. Well, what did they know about nursing moms? They knew that babies breastfeeding, they had another chart. These many babies had fever. These many babies were vomiting. These many babies had convulsions. These many babies had their tissues swelling. It's called edema. One poor baby went into convulsions, was taken to the hospital, had multi-organ system failure, and died. Pfizer knew that they were murdering babies in more than one way. This document was sent to the White House on April 20th, 2021. On April 23rd, 2021, Dr. Walensky gave a press conference from the White House telling the pregnant women of America that there was no bad time to get an injection before you got pregnant, during your pregnancy, or after your baby was born. She had this document in her hand. They knew what they were doing, and now there's a 13 to 20% drop in live births. In the West, at the same time that people who have no memory of a free society are flowing in to the United States and Western Europe to become the inhabitants of those geographical regions. As Ed Dowd said when he talked about how 1 million Americans are self-identifying as disabled every month, and we were talking about the immigration flow, and I'm the daughter and granddaughter of immigrants. I believe in legal immigration set by a people at their level that they want. But he said, just wait 5 years. Just wait. Who got mandated? Our soldiers, our sailors, our teachers, our healthcare workers, our college students, our next generations. The people you need are special operators, the people you need to defend a free society. They're the ones who got mandated. So now the last thing I want to tell you, and the title of my talk is Facing the Beast. What happened to us? Who did this, right? Who did this? And it's not over yet. I found through original research, primary research, that China has an MOU with Pfizer, and they are co-producing this injection. And that in 2021, according to the SEC filing for BioNTech, the subsidiary of Pfizer that makes this injection, the IP went to China. China, Fosun Pharmaceutical, which is run by the Chinese Communist Party, senior members of the party, manufactured 1 billion doses, not for internal use. They exported those doses. They opened 14 manufacturing plants in Western Europe and now 11 in the United States. So when you get a Pfizer injection, and we don't know about Moderna, we're working on that, but when you get a Pfizer injection, you're getting an injection formulated, composited, manufactured, transported, distributed, put into your arm by people who want you dead. That is why I have described this injection as a bioweapon. And I'm not being rhetorical. Our enemies formulated this. It's kind of brilliant, right? It's not the first time. You know, bioweapons have been used before, smallpox in blankets that went to Native American communities, or, you know, infected animals flung over the walls of Troy. But our enemies did this to us, along with multinational traitors like the World Health Organization, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That's the end of my talk, with one last conclusion, because I've run out of time and I want to take questions for a minute if there is time. I've gone too long. You know, this is a very depressing message, and I can understand that people would just be like, I just want to get high, Naomi, leave me alone, you know, like this is like, you know, let's change the channel from this. But I do believe that this horrific journey is an opportunity for us. I really do. I think, you know, we've all, in the last couple of years, been forced to think, what do we want America to be? And we've been forced to go back to first principles. Yeah, and we've been forced to find our communities, and they're often a whole new communities. And many of us have realized that the only thing that matters is our kids and our elders and our loved ones and our, you know, and our planet and our pets. And we've realized that we need to put on the full armor of God, basically, to fight this fight. And so on that note, I believe that we can prevail. And I want to thank you very much.